Bienvenue au Meetup Cursor, donc Cursor Nantes Meetup, donc un des premiers Meetup Cursor en France tout court. Merci d'être nombreux en ligne, donc là je vois on est une trentaine, donc plutôt cool. Et puis ce soir un peu particulier, donc du coup on fait ça en live, c'est enregistré, ça sera du coup après sur YouTube. Il n'y aura pas forcément un mix comme c'était fait avant, mais voilà, l'idée de pouvoir échanger avec Nick et d'enregistrer ça et de pouvoir le partager au plus grand nombre. Rapidement, qui je suis? Eh ben, moi, c'est Julien. Je suis CTO d'une société récente qui s'appelle TechTown. Et j'utilise Cursor depuis un an. Je suis assez fan. J'ai pas mal discuté avec les gens côté Cursor et je suis passé Cursor ambassadeur. Et donc, dans l'idée de pouvoir animer des meet-up, partager de l'info autour de Cursor. Et je suis aussi impliqué dans pas mal de choses autour des communautés, que ça soit côté Google, Google Cloud, voilà, pas mal sur Nantes, notamment le DevFest Nantes. Ce soir, donc la partie Cursor Live Meetup, donc plutôt cool. Donc c'est en utilisant Luma. Luma, donc une plateforme pour organiser des événements, et on a eu quand même 88 participants. Donc bon, je pense qu'il y a un peu de perte vu l'heure, mais voilà, j'accepterai du monde au fur et à mesure. L'idée, c'est de faire 1h, 1h15 avec Nick, avec du coup au programme une partie intro, nouvelle feature par Nick, une session après Q&A. Donc pour ça, pensez à utiliser la partie de Meet pour les questions-réponses, éviter le chat, ça va être un peu le bazar. Et comme ça, vous pouvez upvoter par rapport aux questions. N'hésitez pas, c'est don't be shy, désolé pour la faute d'orthographe, mais soyez pas timide. Voilà, posez vos questions, que ce soit en anglais ou en français. Moi, je pourrais traduire pour Nick s'il y a besoin. Donc voilà, même si vous n'êtes pas très à l'aise avec l'anglais, n'hésitez pas à poser vos questions. Et donc maintenant, on va du coup laisser la main à Nick. Donc I switch in English. Thanks Nick for being there. I let you share the slides. There is almost 30 people there to discuss about Cursor. So like I said, quick introduction and some new feature from your side at Anysphere, the company behind Cursor. And then we will do a Q&A session using the Meet Q&A section dedicated to do some question, a vote. And if there is some French question, I will translate to you in English and we will talk about. Okay? So I let you do the show. It's you, Nick.
Great. Thank you so much. Really excited to be here with all of you. I'm in Los Angeles today. I wish I was in France with you. I actually was in Paris about a week and a half ago, did a Paris meetup there. Not sure if any of you were able to attend, but absolutely love France. And who knows, maybe one of these days I'll be able to do this in French with you. That would be my dream. I'm slowly learning, but I think this will all go a lot better if we do it in English today. So really excited to be here. Just a little bit about me. I joined Cursor the first week of February, so I was employee number 26. I think we're up to like 175 employees now, so we're growing quite quickly. We're based in San Francisco. I live in Los Angeles, but I'm up in San Francisco about half the time. We just recently opened an office in New York a few weeks ago, and I think we're going to open our first overseas office, most likely in London, in the first half, maybe the first quarter of next year. My role at Cursor is a field engineer. So what I do primarily is work with large enterprise customers that are interested in adopting AI and using Cursor as part of their software development tools. And so I do a lot of training of engineers in how to use Cursor and get the most out of it. And I also do a lot of these sessions, just talking to all types of users of Cursor. I started as a software engineer many years ago, worked as a product manager, a CTO, a founder, and I discovered Cursor about a year ago, and it just really completely changed my life. So I have a lot of enthusiasm for what AI is doing for us as software engineers. I've never been more inspired and energized to build. I think it's more fun than ever. And really excited to share that enthusiasm with people and to talk with people that are making these same discoveries. So what I wanted to do today is just spend the first few minutes just kind of giving you a little information about the product and where we're headed. Talk a little bit about this new release that we just rolled out, version 1.6, and also give you an idea of kind of what the next maybe 4 or 5 months might look like. You know, when I joined Cursor, we really had no roadmap, to be honest with you. Like, we were lucky if we knew what was happening 6 weeks from today. I think part of that was there were very few engineers. There were only about 10 engineers working in the company. And everybody was just kind of working on like whatever they wanted to work on. We're now probably at over 40 engineers. We have hired our first product managers this past summer. And so we're starting to formalize the process a little bit. And a few weeks ago, we dropped internally a roadmap through January, which my jaw hit the ground, frankly, when I opened that document. We have never looked that far ahead ever. So I'm going to want to just kind of also give you a little kind of high level overview of where I think you can expect to potentially see the product and the platform going in the coming months, which is a common question. So I'm going to go through a few slides. We'll talk about that, and then would love to just get into Q&A with you guys. Any questions you have about the product, the company, AI, building with AI, would love to make this interactive and discuss with you. All right, I'm going to share my screen. I've got just a few slides here I would like to show you, and we will get started here. Okay. Again, my name is Nick Miller. I'm a field engineer. This is my Twitter account. I try to post there as much as I can, kind of ebb and flow, but would love if you follow me there. Feel free to interact with me there. I try to post a lot of information just about Cursor, about new releases, about techniques, just things I'm excited about in the AI space. And then my email is there as well. Feel free to contact me anytime. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, anything, would love to hear from you. So nick@cursor.com. So what's new? We just released a version 1.6. We are kind of speeding up the cadence at which we're releasing. Usually we're doing a major release maybe once a month. Now we're kind of kicking it up to every 2 or 3 weeks. 1.6 came out in the last week. It is a smaller release, but there are a few key features in it that I'm particularly excited about. Probably the biggest one is custom slash commands. So for those of you that are experienced with Cursor, when you go into settings and you create a project rule, Cursor creates a .cursor directory. It creates a rule subdirectory. And then in that rule subdirectory, every rule set that you create is added to that directory. You can now add a commands directory in that .cursor directory, and you can add as many markdown files with cursor commands that you'd like. So to give an example of one that I use on a regular basis, lately I've been developing a backend API. This is a Python API that is running with a fast API framework. And you know, to be able to start up that API server, there's a few commands I have to run. I have to get into the right directory. I have to initiate my virtual environment. I have to run the command to actually start the server. Also, if there's any sort of port conflict, I need to sort that out. So that used to be, you know, 2, 3, maybe 4 commands that I would need to run in the terminal. Now I can create a command in Cursor to do all of that. So what I did was I created a markdown file called start server. So it's startserver.md. And in that markdown file, I just lay it out in natural language what the commands are to start the server. And now what I can do in Cursor is go into the chat pane, and in the input field there, I can press the /. That will reveal a contextual menu, and all of my commands will be listed there at the top of the menu. So I can just hit / and choose start server from the menu, and then the agent will execute the instructions in that markdown file. So really excited about this. This is just a way to automate a lot of tasks that you might do on a regular basis, just make them a lot faster. Another example, on the same API job I was running, I had something where I was like storing data in the database. And for me to continue to test this feature, I wanted to clear the data before I ran another test. And it required a few different database commands to clear the data. I was able to just create a command here, created a markdown file, laid out all the commands, and then I could just hit /. I called it clear database cache, and it would go ahead and run it for me. So this is just one of those things that is kind of simple, but once you kind of work it into your workflow, it can be extremely powerful. So those are / commands. Another feature in 1.6 are summarization triggers. And so what this means is that when you are in a chat session, and the session is going particularly long, the context window is growing and growing, at any time you can type / summarize, and Cursor will compact all of the context window in that chat session into a distilled, smaller version. So the size of your context window will reduce significantly, but Cursor will try to still include all the key elements so you don't lose too much context. So summarize can be nice if you're concerned about the size of your context window, the amount of tokens you're consuming, or just being able to extend kind of the runway on how much length you have in that chat session. And then lastly, for those of you that are really into MCP servers, we now have MCP resources support. So MCP, in the protocol, there is a resources component that allows servers to share other types of data to the agent. So for example, you can now share file resources, database schema resources, application-specific information resources. If you want to learn more about this, you can check out the MCP specification and learn about resources. But this is a feature that has been around for some time now, but wasn't really fully supported in Cursor. So if you're a real MCP nerd, this will be exciting to you, will allow you to extend the capabilities of MCP. Yes. So some new things coming in 1.6. Again, that is available to you now. And then I just want to tease 1.7. 1.7 is going to be a monster release. I don't have an exact timeline of when it will come out. Probably will be available in full release in approximately 2 weeks. We're doing final testing now. If you are on the early release schedule, if you go into Cursor, you go to settings, you choose the beta tab. There is a menu there where you can be on like a standard release schedule or an early access. If you choose early access, you may get it as soon as in the next week. And there's some really exciting stuff coming in 1.7. So super, it's going to be a very meaty release. So that is coming. I'm not going to talk too much about it because we're always kind of finishing things at the last minute. Some things may not make it, some things may, but some really good stuff coming in 1.7. Okay, so let's talk about beyond 1.6, 1.7, kind of the future of Cursor in the coming months. As I mentioned, we now have a roadmap that goes to January. There's some really exciting stuff in there. And, you know, as our engineering team grows and grows, we can start doing more and more ambitious things at a faster and faster release rate. So I think that's something for those of you that have been using Cursor for, you know, maybe the last year or so, the last 6 months. As I mentioned, when I started first week of February, we were only about 10 engineers. Now we're about 4 or more times that. And so we're just able to do a lot more and release a lot more. So you're going to see kind of the cadence and the quantity pick up, and also hopefully the quality. So kind of high level, what you can expect us to be focusing on in the coming months. First is a new agent layout. This is actually available in 1.6 in beta. This is something that me personally, I am loving. So for those of you that tend to use the chat pane for most of your development, you know, we find that there's kind of a split. We have some people that use Cursor that really prefer tab and are hands-on keyboard and still typing code by hand and using tab, the next action prediction model, to kind of help speed up that hand coding. But on the other end, we have a lot of people that are really using the chat pane to generate most of their code. And this new agent layout is really designed for those users. So with this new layout, and again, you can enable this in 1.6 in the beta tab of settings. It basically distills down your window to just a pane here where you can see all of your agents, and a large interface here where you can prompt the agent. So you do not see your files, and you do not see your file tree. This is For me, like I always felt a little kind of claustrophobic in the chat pane, like I would want to be writing specs. That was really where most of my focus was, but I was having to share that column with the file editor and also the file explorer. And so this really blows it out where you are able to basically really have the chat pane be the primary column in the interface. You can always unfold this interface and go back to the normal interface with the file editor and with the file explorer. But the idea here is that the agent is getting better and better and better. The models are getting better and better and better. And you can really start to build quite a bit, really just talking to the agent and being less concerned about what exactly is happening in the files and happening in the file explorer. I can tell you at Cursor, this is really the way that all of our engineers build. There are very few engineers that are typing code out by hand anymore. We are all iterating with a model, usually a thinking model, building out a really comprehensive airtight plan on a feature that we want to build. And then once that plan is really, really tight, we will then hand that off to the model to build out and kind of one-shot that feature. And so this interface is really great for that sort of experience in Cursor. So again, available now if you go to the beta tab in settings. I am absolutely loving this interface. Another thing that is coming is a planning mode. So kind of going back to the comment I just made, where here at Cursor, most of our engineers are kind of iterating and iterating on an initial plan with the model. And then once that plan is really tight, passing it off to the model to build out on its own autonomously. This new planning mode is another kind of interface and workflow that will help you build these specs and build these plans if this is how you like to work. This is an earlier version of what this interface looks like, but essentially allows you to iterate with the model to build out a plan, to build out subtasks in that plan, and really make Cursor great for planning. Again, for me personally, I would often feel sort of claustrophobic in that chat's pane, especially when I was really working in a planning mode and not so much writing code yet. In fact, sometimes I would open up Claude and just do it in the web browser and kind of do my planning there and then bump that out as a markdown and bring it into Cursor. So this really gives you a new UI that is optimized for planning. And we really see this as kind of the future for building if you want to do these kind of longer horizon tasks with the agent in the chat pane. So excited you will be seeing this here in the fall. We're doing a lot of internal testing and iterating on this and expect it to come out soon. Parallel agents is another big focus for us. As you know, you can currently run multiple tabs in the Cursor IDE. Each tab has its own agent. And so you can kick off an agent in more than one tab and have all those tabs, all those agents running at the same time. But it can be a little clumsy. Those agents can kind of trip over each other. If one tab has been working on a file and then an agent in another tab wants to edit that same file, it will stop and ask you to save it. You can also kick off multiple background agents. Each of those background agents are going to clone their own version of the repo, and that allows them to work a bit more asynchronously. But then when you bring in all those PRs, you often have to kind of reconcile the differences in the code. So we're doing a lot of work to try to allow parallel agents to work more harmoniously and to have kind of less of these collisions, less of these bottlenecks as you bring in multiple agents working at the same time. This is just an example of one interface that we've been playing with. This is a Kanban sort of interface where you can be running, you can kind of queue up tasks that you want to do and be running multiple agents at one time. But this is a big focus of something that we're looking towards is just getting these parallel agents running in more harmony together. And then sub agents. This is something I'm really excited about. This is the idea that you could kick off an agent and then it could kick off one or more sub agents that it is orchestrating, all working towards one singular task. And the idea here is that, especially for a longer horizon task, you might ask the agent to do something. There can be many different subtasks that need to be completed to complete that overall task. But each of those tasks could be quite different. Each of those tasks really could run in parallel at the same time. And each of those tasks may be better for one model or another. So the idea here that a master agent could kick off sub-agents and that these sub-agents may not all be using the same model. If one agent is kind of building out the architecture for the task, it may use a model that's specifically good at architecture. If another sub-agent is doing, let's say, front-end work, on that task, it may choose a model that is particularly good at front-end work. So looking at how we can build out sub-agent support and allow kind of this master agent to orchestrate multiple agents under the hood. And then lastly, making it work well, but also making it work faster. For those of you, you're probably like me, you've been using Cursor for some time now. When you first used Cursor, it just absolutely blew your mind. You couldn't believe how fast Cursor was, how quickly you could build, how painless it was. It really feels like a superpower. But then, like any piece of technology, eventually you start to get used to it and it becomes really about speed. And I think that anytime a technology tool just starts to run a little bit slower than your brain runs, it really kind of feels like it's holding you back. I know for me personally, there are times when I submit a prompt to Cursor and I'm a little frustrated that it's not just instantly responding to me and I'm having to wait a few seconds or maybe even a minute for it to complete that task. And so we're doing a lot of work to speed up Cursor. You can expect a new feature in Cursor to be coming here. I'm hoping in the coming weeks. We actually have it built out here and we're just making some refinements. Quite possible you'll see it before the end of October. That will be the fastest you have ever experienced Cursor. And most likely the fastest you've ever experienced working with any of these large language models for programming. So speed is also something we're very focused on, and we really want to push the envelope there. So Cursor is really a faster experience than you have ever had before in any sort of AI-assisted coding tool. So that gives you kind of an idea of where we're headed. Of course, all this is subject to change. Who knows what next month will bring in terms of models. This is a really crazy space that moves really fast, as I'm sure you guys know, but kind of gives you an overlook. So want to spend the rest of the time here with Q&A. Again, encourage you to, I'll just kind of go back here, encourage you to follow me here on Twitter. Please feel free to email me any questions that don't get answered or anything that comes up in the future. Love interacting with you guys, and also really hoping to get back out to Europe and get back out to France in particular, hopefully even before the end of the year. And I'll promote that on my Twitter. Would love to meet you guys in person. I was just one last thing I'll say. I was in Europe for almost 2 weeks at the beginning of this month. And I spoke at Spotify at a fireside chat there where all their lead engineers came from around the world for a conference. And then I had the pleasure of being able to hit a bunch of cities in Europe to do user meetups. And I was just so inspired by everything that is happening over there, how like energized the builder community is. It's so cool to see kind of how Cursor is playing into that and empowering a lot of people to do this work. And I know that a lot of this is very much focused around the Bay Area and San Francisco, but I just want you to know that like you guys are very much on our radar and we want to, you know, continue to support you better and better. So you can expect that. I want to make myself accessible to you. We're continuing to really push on this stuff, doing events like this. So really exciting about everything that's happening out there. All right, let's open it up to Q&A. Julien, I'm not sure what the best way to manage this is.
I will ask the question or copy paste in the chat also, and yeah, we will go.
Okay.
Thank you first for the presentation, the roadmap of Cursor, the next release. So many stuff over there. First question, I think.
I feel like the first one is in French. Maybe you could like repaste that in English, and then I could work through these English ones here that are there. So first one is sorry. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's go.
For bringing /plans. Do you know if there is a plan for agents.md standard to support these as well? So I believe that, let me make sure this is correct because this is a relatively new addition, but we do now support, let me make sure, we do now support agents.md. So you can add an agents.md file to your project root, and you can include rules in that file as instead of adding them to .cursor/rules. So for those of you that may be using other platforms that support AgentsMD and you want to share your rules across those platforms and Cursor, we do now support that. Slash commands are in the .cursor/commands directory. So that is still going to be kind of a Cursor specific thing. But AgentsMD is now supported. I believe it was in version like 1.4, 1.5 that we started supporting that. So just make sure you're upgraded and you're good to go there. Next question here, you mentioned planning. I do it in Claude Opus. Sonnet is not good enough. What do you bring on top of Opus? So I too use Opus for planning. I think it's incredible how good Opus is for planning. I've built some things in the last few months since Opus came out, really complex systems where I have been able to, I kind of in my head or on a piece of paper will sort of sketch out what I want to do. Actually, something that I personally love to do in that very beginning phase of creating an idea, I will use the ChatGPT app on my phone and use the voice mode. And I'll just have a conversation with the model in voice mode about the idea that I have. I'll kind of lay out and maybe talk for 5 minutes about sort of what's in my mind. And then I will just talk to the model in a conversational way about, what do you think of this idea? What do you think is missing? What sort of things do we need to clarify? And I'll just go back and forth and just sort of conceptually sort of further mold the idea. And then from there, I will go and use Claude Opus to start to formalize that into a spec. For me personally, as I mentioned before, I often would just do that with the Claude website because I just like the interface. Now that we have this agent view in Cursor that I mentioned that you can open up in beta, I now do it there just because I feel like that interface is as good as the web was. The planning mode is basically going to add some additional sort of planning-centric guidance to your prompts that will be in our system prompt. And then it's also going to give you some additional sort of architecture in the interface to sort of break up these instructions into tasks and subtasks. So you'll still be able to use Opus for planning, but it'll kind of be supercharged. Cursor is going to be adding things to your prompts to really optimize the output from Opus for doing all that work. But I totally agree. I'm just blown away at how good Claude Opus is for planning. Next question here is, I scrolled too fast. With sub-agents, the purpose is to go from an idea to code, creating some sub-agents depending on the architecture, front-end agent, back-end agent, how to follow each agent. So, we're not entirely sure yet. This is something that is definitely a little bit further along in the timeline. We're doing a lot of experimentation. I would say half the stuff we're building never makes it into the product. So we are trying all different kinds of things. We're doing a ton of R&D. We use Cursor to build Cursor. Everybody in the company uses Cursor. It's not just engineers. Go-to-market uses it. Technical support engineers. Everybody uses Cursor. So we are constantly dog-fooding these different features. And because it is so quick to build the features, everybody is really encouraged. If you have an idea, we don't have a meeting about it and kind of fight about the features and, take 2 weeks to create a spec. You're just really encouraged to just build it. And everybody has access to the mono repo that powers all of our platform, and to just build it and put it out there and start playing with it and allowing other people to play with it. So sub-agents is definitely in an earlier phase. We are experimenting with what the agents can really do. I think that, this is sort of idealism to think that one agent can orchestrate sub-agents. The truth is that the models are not really quite there yet to do this really well. I think that's why a lot of the sort of AI agent stuff that you hear about doesn't quite work that well, or sometimes it's really expensive. The truth is that the agents don't quite have the capabilities to knock this out of the park. So we're doing a lot of experimentation to figure out what we can do with the current models. And a lot of what we build, like, kind of stays in this R&D mode until a model comes out that has the capabilities where we feel like the output and the stability is good enough that we can release it to our users. So I think a lot of that sub-agent work is happening too, like kind of trying different things, but knowing kind of what is on the horizon in terms of models from these labs that might unlock the capabilities to really elevate this stuff to a production level that will do really well. Do you use Cursor to answer the questions there? So, I know that you say it's not a serious question, but we use Cursor so I'll give you an example. Our go-to-market team, that's our sales team, right? Some of the people on our sales team have never written code before. Others are really technical or have a lot of experience selling software, and so they understand a lot of the technical aspects. But they will get a question from one of their customers about, let's say, how the logic works for a particular feature. And before Cursor, they would need to go find a software engineer, ask them how this logic works. The software engineer might actually have to go into the code and look at the lines of code to really understand how the logic is constructed. And now our salespeople, or people that are maybe not as technical, can just use Cursor to ask the agent the question, and the agent will look at the code base and answer it. So really, every different persona at Cursor is using Cursor in different ways, and we definitely use the agent to ask a lot of questions. As you know, the models are really good at answering questions about the code, so it can be quite helpful. Or maybe, Olivier, maybe you're asking me, like, would I use Cursor to answer the questions? I mean, I do wonder, like, when is the day going to come where they don't need a human like me answering these questions, and they can just sort of like put up an avatar that is going to be trained on all this information. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm sure that day is coming. But I'm not sure you guys would be here at that point either. So we'll take it day by day. I'm going to give a training class for professionals on Cursor over 2 days. Curious, what are your favorite tricks and tips, as well as your favorite use cases to share? Sure. I have so many. Let me just give you a couple top ones that I think are particularly valuable. Let's talk about two things. One, how to sort of mitigate an issue where, like, the model has hit a wall. Like, especially in this day and age, most of the things you ask the model to do, if you're prompting well and if you're managing your context window well, the model is going to be able to do it. But there will be times when sometimes the model will just fail. It will hit a wall. It gets stuck. I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of my strategies for that situation. And then let's also talk about strategies for how to get the model to work more successfully on a longer horizon task, a task that may have many steps and may take many minutes to complete. So first, when the model gets stuck, there can be times when you prompt the model and it just comes back and what it tries just doesn't work. And you may go back to the model and say, hey, this didn't work. Can you try something else? It'll try another approach. That doesn't work. You'll ask again. It may try another approach. That doesn't work. And you're just not getting anywhere. Sometimes in that situation, the model will get into a loop and it'll eventually try the first thing again and the second thing and the third thing. And it'll kind of keep trying the same things over and over again. Or sometimes you'll prompt the model and just what you're getting back from it is so uncharacteristically stupid. Just the models typically are so brilliant, but just anything you ask the model to do is just so far off. So few things that I do in that situation. One, the first thing I do is just try switching to a different model. In the chat pane, at any time you can open up that model and switch menus, or you can open up the model selection menu and switch to a different model. Cursor is maintaining the context window, the storyline in that chat session. So you can really change models at any time and not lose the context window. So I will switch to another model. Every model is trained in a different way. Even models from the same lineage, a Claude 4 sonnet versus a Claude 3.5 sonnet, they're all going to approach the task in a different perspective. And often I'll try switching to a thinking model if I'm using a standard model. So that's kind of the easiest thing to do to see if you can break through and get a different output. If that doesn't work, what I will do is I'll prompt the model and I'll say, I want you to use chain of thought reasoning and think for 10 paragraphs to finally resolve this issue. And what the model will do is it will actually output 10 paragraphs in its response, and it will think more deeply about the problem. Often, by asking it to think for 10 paragraphs, just that deeper thinking will get the model to kind of unlock something about the problem and take a different approach. But what I like to say is, the output of these models is only as good as your input. So if you're really struggling with the output of the model, it is best to kind of rethink the way you're prompting it, and that will often give you a different outcome. And if I read those 10 paragraphs that the model outputs, it will typically give me a deeper understanding of how the model is approaching this problem. Maybe it has some fundamental misunderstanding that the reading so deeply in these paragraphs will help you uncover and change the way you're prompting. You can clarify something, or just reading those 10 paragraphs will kind of unlock in your mind another way to prompt the model to achieve this task. So that's the second thing I try. So switching models, number one. Second, ask it to use chain of thought reasoning and think for 10 paragraphs. If those two things don't work, I will open up a new chat session and just start from scratch again. Every time you open a new chat session, a new tab in the chat pane, that is a brand new context window. Sometimes the context window just kind of goes wonky. You might have said something earlier in the conversation that's really throwing off the model. Every subsequent prompt that you submit in that session, Cursor is picking out what it thinks are all the relevant details in the session and including that in the prompt. Cursor might be picking out something that is confusing the model, especially when you prompt the model and it's just uncharacteristically dumb and just like everything it's coming back with is so far off. That often means that something has gone sideways with that context window, and it is best to just start a new session. Start with a really good foundation in your initial prompt or two, and that typically will clear it. So that's what I recommend if you get stuck, if you hit a wall with the model. And then let's just briefly talk about the best strategy when you want the model to complete a longer duration task. So as an example, here's a great example. This is kind of the first time I really unlocked how to use the agent for a larger task. I personally provision a lot of EC2 instances with AWS. I might be doing like some full stack development where maybe I'm building like a React front end and like a Python API backend. And for me to mount that on an EC2 server, there's probably like 20 or 30 things I need to do to provision that server. I need to install a web server. I need to set up directories. I need to create the domain support. Maybe I'm creating auto SSL renewals. I got to set up the database. I've got database backups. There's language support, kind of all these different tasks that I need to do to provision. And, it might take me an hour to do all that. And inevitably, I'm going to end up fighting with the terminal a little bit here or there because something won't work. And so one of the first things I really just realized I could use the agent for was to do that provisioning for me. And so this is the approach I use for that. But this approach could be really used for anything where the agent is doing a long form multi-step task. Maybe you're having it refactor a code base from one language to another. There's a lot of different opportunities here. The best way to do this is to first start by creating a long form spec as a markdown file. So what I would do is I would connect Cursor to the EC2 instance, and I would choose a thinking model like Opus would be a great choice here. And I would basically just kind of give the model sort of a laundry list of all the things that I need done, all the things we just talked about, right? Install this database, set up backups, get this web server installed, just kind of a bulleted list. And at the end of the prompt, I would say something like, I'd set it up. I want you to provision. I want to create a spec to provision this EC2 instance. These are all the things we need to do. Let me know if you think I'm missing anything, if you have any questions, need any clarification. The model come back, maybe ask me some questions. It may have some other ideas of things that I might have missed. Some of those I might want to do, others I don't. And then ultimately, after a few different turns of that conversation, it will create this long form markdown file that will be a specification for the provisioning. Once I have that markdown file, I will then ask the model to create a second markdown file that lists all of the tasks that need to be completed to build out that specification. And I will ask it to group those tasks in sort of logical phases and sequence them in a logical order. Once I have my long form markdown file, and I then have my second markdown that is a task list, I will then ask the model to go ahead and provision the server per the specification, and I'll use the @ symbol and reference that markdown file that is the spec. And then I'll say, I want you to work in the order of the tasks in this checklist. I'll use the @ symbol and reference that file. And as you complete each task, I want you to check it off. By giving the model the long form spec, it has all the details it needs to do the provisioning. But then by giving it a checklist, it will really help the model stay on task. Sometimes when you give the model a long form multi-step task, it can get lost, especially if it goes down a rabbit hole on something. It'll kind of forget the bigger picture sometimes of what it's doing and just like stop prematurely. Typically, when you give it a checklist like this, it will allow it to kind of remember the bigger picture and stay on task. You also have the added benefit that as it's working, it may take 15, 20 minutes for that agent to provision the server. I can look at that checklist and see exactly what has been completed and what it still needs to do as it's working, which can be really helpful. And if for some reason it gets stuck or it stops, I know exactly where I need to pick up. So I think when you're doing a longer form task, writing a good spec and then doing a checklist, I think that is a great technique to really get the model to perform in the most successful way for a long form task. Next one, what other tools do you use besides Cursor and Claude Opus in your workflow? Not many, to be honest with you. I use Warp for my terminal application. It's got like a nice AI integration where I can like ask natural language questions, which is great. And I'm big into like a text editor. I use like a plain text editor, just kind of keep notes and stuff. I just like to keep things simple. But Cursor, like I used to use Postman a lot to like probe different API endpoints and try different calls. Now I just tell the agent to do it, and because it can run terminal commands, it does it for me. So really, I would say Cursor. I am using like ChatGPT and Claude websites for kind of like early kind of discovery stuff. And then Warp if I want to have stuff in a terminal outside of the terminal baked into Cursor. I use Figma for like front end stuff, but just in terms of like writing code, those are really my core products. I'm looking at my just kind of looking at what the applications are on my computer. Yeah, I think those are really the key things. I play a little bit with like voice to text. So I was using like Super Whisper and kind of playing with like talking to the agent instead of typing. I know a lot of people love that. For me personally, like what I realized was I just like typing it out the way my brain works is better for me. Like, even though I have to touch the keyboard, I feel like I'm more specific, and for me, my process, I ended up going back to the keyboard and not doing voice to text. How does Cursor process the additional MCP resources without increasing latency? I mean, this is all kind of baked into the protocol. So the support is there. I don't think that really what's coming back from those resources is any different in terms of transmission feed from what you're getting with the data. But you do want to be careful. I mean, anything coming back from that MCP server is filling your context window. So that is something to consider. I tested Cursor a few weeks ago to start a new project from scratch. I didn't configure Cursor at all. After a few iterations, code proposals were sometimes good, sometimes bad. I wonder if it's related to context we passed each question. My question is how to use Cursor efficiently, how to learn it. Yeah, I think when you first use Cursor, there is definitely a learning curve on how to prompt. I think with most people, when they first start using it, you'll ask the model to do something and it won't quite do it the way you want it, and you maybe have to try a few times to get what you want. But after you've been using it for a week or two, you start to learn how to talk to these models where you can submit a single prompt and in most cases get the output you want. So I think getting a handle on how to prompt, and that just takes a little practice and trial and error. But I think Also, an awareness of the context window is extremely important. So what I mean by the context window is when you open a tab in the chat pane, that is a brand new context window. You can think of the context window as the short-term memory that the model has for that conversation. It's interesting. These models actually have no short-term memory. They have insane long-term memory. They've been trained on an incredible amount of information. You can go to ChatGPT, for example. You can ask a question about any topic and get a really informed answer back. But when you submit a prompt to the model and it responds, it actually does not remember that exchange. And so if you are talking to the model and you get the perception that it has a short-term memory, it remembers the conversation that you're having, it's actually the software that you're using that is building the scaffolding kind of around the model to give you that perception of short-term memory. And so the way Cursor does that is every time you submit a subsequent prompt in that chat pane, Cursor is sending your prompt, but it's also including all of the relevant details that came before it in that chat session. So that is the context window. A couple strategies. One, you want to try to keep those chat sessions as focused as possible. You do not want to allow one section to run for a really long period of time where you're jumping around to a lot of different topics. The models are going to perform best the smaller the context window is and the more focused it is. So get in the habit of starting a new session by clicking the plus button and opening a new tab in Cursor with every new focus of your work. If you get in that habit, the context windows will stay smaller, so the models will be more accurate. And if you try to focus each one of those tabs on just kind of one singular storyline, you're going to find that the models are going to perform a lot better. So that would be like kind of one of my number one tips, and Manuel, likely a strategy that will really help in addition to just getting better at prompting. One other thought on prompting, it's best to submit more prompts with less tasks per prompt than less prompts with more tasks per prompt. If you are like finishing up a feature and you maybe have like a dozen things that need to be done to get that feature to the finish line, fix this little bug, polish this little thing, change that, better to kind of submit those as individual prompts than to submit one prompt with like 12 things in the prompt. The model will perform better, again, if it has less it needs to pay attention to with each prompt. All right, coming into the last 5 minutes here. A lot of my customers don't want to use Cursor or such AI tools because they don't want their code to be sent to servers. They don't mind having mail and documents on Microsoft and Google servers, I know. Can you use Cursor with self-hosted models, and is this a good idea? You actually can run your own models in Cursor. If you go to the Models tab in Settings, you can connect your own models. It never works out very well. The models that we offer in Cursor are really good at writing code and also doing all the tool calling that you need to make Cursor work well. Also, we have really great relationships with all these labs, Anthropic, OpenAI, et cetera. And so we get very fast responses from their servers, as well as pretty much no rate limits. Cursor is making a lot of calls to the models. Often if you bring your own key, bring your own model, you may run into rate limits, which can be frustrating. So don't really recommend bringing your own models, although you can do that. We have an agreement with every single lab that offers these models that we integrate with, that it's zero data retention. So what that means is that when you submit a prompt, let's say to Anthropic and Cursor, and it returns a response, Anthropic does not store that data. It doesn't train on that data. It just uses it to return the response. So that is an important consideration there, and that's true of every model we integrate with. And then there are privacy modes in Cursor. You can set the privacy mode to prevent Cursor from training on any of your data and seeing your data. And then also, if you are an enterprise customer or a Teams customer, if you're a business, your default settings are that we're not viewing your code, we're not training on it. If you go to cursor.com/security, you can learn more about kind of how we handle all of the security in the system, what pieces of that architecture touch your code and kind of what our overall security posture is. But there are absolutely ways to work with Cursor where we're not seeing any of your code, any of your data, not retaining any of it. And if you work with a business, that is kind of the standard setting there. All right. The lib documentation provided by Cursor is up to date at doc. I'm not exactly sure what this question is. The at docs, if you go into the input field in the chat pane and you do at docs, you can actually attach documentation that you have added in settings. I love this feature. If I'm like integrating with a third-party API, I can go into settings and go to docs and add the URL for that documentation. And then I can prompt the model and hit at and attach that documentation. And I basically just post-train the model on the docs. It's cool.
I think the question is more about what's the way to be sure the docs you're providing are up to date to the official documentation, for example.
Yeah, so with that docs feature, you can re-index the docs. There is also an MCP server called Context 7, which is actually the most popular MCP server with Cursor that connects to a lot of the documentation for the most popular languages and frameworks. And that's a great way to ensure you're using the most current documentation. All right, guys, this is super fun. Unfortunately, I have to stop now. Meeting I have to jump to, but loved all of your questions. If there's anything I wasn't able to get to and you want to talk about, send me something on Twitter, shoot me an email. Would love to continue the conversation. Thank you so much for having me. This is like my favorite part of my job. Would love to do this again with you guys someday, and someday not so far in the future, and would love to hopefully meet you in person. I will post on my Twitter the next time I'm going to be in France, but really appreciate, Julien, thank you so much for putting this together. Appreciate you guys coming. Great questions. And I love just kind of sharing the enthusiasm of Cursor with you. I just absolutely love it. So this has been a blast.